Right. I want to start off by talking about you did a movie like years ago called The Story of Luke,
Oh yeah.
and because I'm autistic, and I wanted to talk about and mention how it's really rare to see in films a good and honest depiction of autism. So just really
Yes.
thank you for that because it's still really hard to find them, and they're still treated like a magic trick.
100%.
So,
Well,
yeah.
Alonzo Mayo was the director of that one, and his mom ran an institute in South America that was really like the forefront of teaching people in South America what autism was. Because, I mean, like, they were still putting kids in closets and locking them in there because they were different. You know what I mean? They weren't learning the same or they weren't doing the right thing. So it's like he grew up watching them go through this process of, finding themselves, and also like a little bit later of a process, but like trying to do very simple things that everybody would want, which is to, have a girlfriend and have a job and take care of themselves. And so it was, and this is for all levels because obviously it's such a major spectrum of people who can be very high functioning, all the way to Asperger's, and then very low functioning to not even being able to speak. So yeah, it was really a learning process for me. But the thing that was hard for me was we were making a comedy. And so the hardest part of the whole thing was not to feel to the audience like we were making fun of anything, that we were mocking or something like that, because that's obviously not what it was. Right. And it was a very deep, heartfelt idea there from the beginning of like this boy being more functional than the dysfunctional family who was normal that he was living with, And so, yeah, I really loved that movie, but it was walking a fine tightrope of a line where we were trying to create a character that was enough to be laughed with, but not too much to be laughed at. It's the hardest. It was a very fine line.
I think it really succeeds in that because it's one of the few autism depiction movies where, to me, it feels like that it treats the character as one of the everybody,
Yes.
which is so important because
Yes.
like it's not where it's like this character is clearly put on like a spotlight of like you have to represent everything.
Sure.
And like I have immense disdain for some series we won't name or movies that we won't name where it's just it's treated as if somehow it has magical powers or like a superpower, or then is just like is basically an idiot, but they just say that they're autistic.
Exactly right.
And it's really painful to watch. So I'm really glad that even though it is now 13 years old, I think, but it still remains one of the films where somebody asks like, can you like describe the autistic experience? I'll say go watch that because that's one of the rare ones that actually gets it right.
That is so sweet and so nice to hear because making that thing we were hard pressed to figure out if it would hit audiences correctly. You know what I mean? And there are so many people who do not understand it still at all. Yeah. And so this was a movie where we were trying to be, I think, as honest as possible, but also entertaining.
Yeah, I think it works. And like the way that people don't understand it is like I got my diagnosis really late. Like I'm 35 now and I got it when I was 30. So 5 years ago. And at that time I had to go to a doctor who was an immigrant here. He had like come from Germany to study medicine here. And he was the only one who like actually said, yes, autism can be diagnosed in adults, because I had doctors in Finland go, oh, you never diagnose autism in adults because that doesn't happen. It only happens in children. I'm like, well, what happens to children? Do they grow into adults?
Yeah.
And every time they're just like, oh, well, we can't. Like, if you didn't get a diagnosis when you were a kid, you can't get it as an adult.
That makes no sense.
No, especially because in the 90s, autism was not an official diagnosis in Finland.
Right.
So it's like we're just going to ignore it.
Yes.
So to me, every time there's a film in mainstream media or anywhere that actually acknowledges these things as a normal thing, it's one of those things that when we talk about representation mattering, that's exactly what it is.
Sure.
So I wanted to start the conversation off with that by just acknowledging how much it means to me as a viewer and as an artistic person, and just that it's a good film too.
It means a lot to me as well, hearing that, but also it meant a lot to me to even get that part, because I don't know, I end up being, this is a funny thing to me, but I end up being a person who gets a lot of jobs that no one else wants, because they're all too scared of it. You know, it becomes, some of these parts go around, these hires, and nobody knows what the fuck to do with it. They're like, I have no idea how I would do that. And really, that's the whole process for me. That's the whole fun of it, is to say like, yeah, I have no idea either. Let's figure it out together. Let's fucking party, you know?
So you don't have like a fear of what the repercussions would be or what happens next. It's just like a case of let's just jump in, or is it the fear part of that fun?
Fear is part of the fun. Okay. Because yeah, I have so much fear of that. If I didn't have fear of that, then we would have made a movie that was mocking it. You know, we would have made multiple movies where you don't care about the characters enough. I think that every person has a massive amount of fear in them constantly, and it's guiding who they are. So like, being in touch with that fear, even as an actor, is very necessary. If you're overconfident to a certain degree, you're losing the character, all characters. You know what I mean? I think that for me, it's the fear that motivates you. It's the fear that makes you find the person, and also it's the fear that makes you realize that this is going to be on film forever, and people are going to reference this and look at it 20 years later. Like you're talking about from Story of Luke from 13 years ago. And it's like, that could be dated right now. It could be really dated. But at the same time, I think that it's not, because we cared enough about it. Yeah, I get to do some really weird stuff, especially in Touch Me.
Especially in that, and we're going to get to that in just a second, but I wanted to go a little bit further back, and I'm glad you mentioned something being forever and something being scary, because the first film where I saw you in was Thumbsucker.
Awesome.
And that's one of those films which I can only imagine would have been like, as a first film, would have been very scary to make, because not only does it have like, at the time, like really big actor names, but everybody's playing against type.
Yes.
And that was one of those things, because that was 20 years ago or so, but that was like one of those where I started to realize that, oh, you can mess with tone on a completely different kind of scale. Can you just a little bit like mention like, how was that when you started making that as a first film?
It's really interesting that you say playing against type, because I never really thought about that, but now I know. Like, I didn't know Vincent D'Onofrio at the time, his work, right? I was a kid, I was 17 years old, so I was thinking of him as my dad, and I was thinking of Tilda as my mom, and sometimes when I see them still, I think mom and dad, which is really weird. But Tilda was playing like an extremely unconfident woman, which obviously she's one of the most confident people on the planet, you know, and an alien creature from another world, she is. And Vincent D'Onofrio, same thing. He was playing like a very weak, kind of pathetic father. And Keanu Reeves is playing sort of a lost dentist, a sort of psycho hippie dentist, you know. Everyone was playing against type, which is pretty sick. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty cool. I started that process by going to Los Angeles for the first plane ride that I've ever been on in my life. I had never been on a plane at all. And there was all of a sudden a call on my home telephone that was, hi, my name is Billy Lazarus, and I'm an agent at UTA, and I would like to represent you. And we were all like, me and my family were just like, this is probably another scam. we've had a couple of scams in our time where there's like a manager who's calling who actually just wants to make money off of you. Yeah. And so they really aren't going to do anything for you. They're just going to attach their name and then take a percentage of what you make, right? This guy was for real. I had no idea what UTA was, you know? I think the only thing that really led me to that was making Personal Velocity ahead of time. Rebecca Miller was in that, was directing that one. Arthur Miller's daughter and Daniel Day-Lewis, wife. And so when I made that movie, the fact that Daniel Day-Lewis was just on the set for that film, it's like, you couldn't get a better practice or a better like insert into the world of film than to be working with like the great Daniel Day-Lewis, incredible, and Rebecca Miller, insane. So the thing that Rebecca said to me right at the end of that was, just do me a favor, Lou, don't do shit. And I was like, God, this is going to be really hard. This is going to be a really tough, because there is a lot of shit out there, no matter what. And I think that I've been trying to follow that road that Rebecca put me on, 30 years ago, for the last 30 years, which is crazy. So Thumbsucker, I took my first flight to Los Angeles. I have no idea what I'm in for. My agent is putting me out there for multiple auditions, and I only have 3 days. In fact, I don't think it's weird to say this now, but I actually booked a role while I was in Los Angeles for Greg Araki's Mysterious Skin. And I was playing the part that Brady Corbet, who just made The Brutalist. Incredible, right? So I was apparently supposed to play that part, but it wasn't in the cards of the universe, because the real reason I had gone out there was to audition for Thumbsucker. And about a week after I got cast as Greg Araki's Mysterious Skin, I finally got the word that I had made it and I was going to be in Thumbsucker. So I had to make a choice because they're both going to be filmed at the same time. Right. And I chose Thumbsucker, obviously, because it was just the bigger role and the more important role with a bunch of amazing actors all around it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, Mike Mills is the truest artist I've ever worked with in my life. I mean, caring so much about all these characters. And in a lot of ways, he was like my mom and dad on that film as well. He was teaching me how to be an actor and how to be a good person and how to survive in this business over time. But he had been working on that thing for 5 years, trying to get it made and trying to get enough of a budget for it. Because, like everybody wants to cut it down and make it for less money. And that's kind of what they were trying to do to him for the longest time. But he stuck to his guns and he knew the way he wanted to make. And he made, like, honestly, what I think is one of the best movies I've ever seen in terms of like a coming of age story.
Yeah, no, it was very formative in my teenage years when I saw that, because it came out here to the Helsinki Film Festival, and that was like the place where you went to see movies, where you were just trying to kind of figure out who you are as a person and what do you like. Yeah. And I remember the thing that really impressed me about that was that it made me question so many things where I had kind of said that, well, this is what I'm expected to like, this is what I'm expected to kind of behave, and then walking out of that and going like that, well, these are genuinely the things that interest me, or these are the things, or this is the kind of stuff that genuinely makes me feel something. Yeah. And then having to go like that, looking in the mirror and go like, well, like, what do I like? Yeah. And I think that's really the power of a movie like that, it really helps you have that conversation with yourself.
At that time, I was quite a child. I was really just about to go to college, and so this was a movie that was mimicking my real life. Because it's about a boy who finally wants to leave home and get out of his family environment, and that's exactly what I was doing at that exact moment. But Mike Mills also, one of the coolest things that he did was that he always came up with some kind of like a physical practice to create the character. Like, I had never smoked weed because I was 17 years old, and I was kind of a little good old boy, you know what I mean? I was like just a little kid. And I had never really done any drugs at all. And so he had me put weights on my legs. And he told me if this was the practice. I had to take something from one table, whatever it was, where I had to find things in the apartment that we were in. This was the practice, this was the rehearsal. And I had to talk about what it was, but I had to explain that it was something else. So basically I had to lie and say like, yes, this is a boot, and a boot is made of leather, and it's and bring it from one part, and wearing these weights on my legs. Right. The other, and so which is slowing you down and everything. And the other thing that they had me do was to wear this elastic band around my wrist, and every time that I thought about my thumb, to snap it. And so you get this like pain, this rush of pain in your wrist, like each time. It's supposed to be, willing you to stop thinking of it or creating it as a negative thought, the whole like sucking a thumb thing. I sucked my thumb until I was 7 years old, personally. So like I was a kid who was a thumb sucker. Right. and there is a massive stigma against certain things like that. It's like overly childish, or it's a representation of your mother's nipple or something like that, and so people are extremely embarrassed about this thing. One of the other things that Mike had me do was he said, I want you to go, this is before I even met him, so I was still in New Jersey as a kid, and he calls me up and he's like, I want you to do a couple things. One, I want you to wrap tape around your thumb, like duct tape, and if anyone asks you why it's there, you have to make up a lie. You cannot tell them why the duct tape is there. You have to come up with something else, which made you practice being embarrassed about your thumb and having to come up with something, a lie. You know what I mean? Yeah. The other one was to go to a social place like a market or a grocery store or something like that, and he said, I just want you to find a place in like a social spot where you can go and hide and suck your thumb. I was like, whoa, man. So that's a true artist, in my opinion. Someone who is helping me as the actor feel the actual feelings of a person who would be in that situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you brought up the whole like things seen as childish and how society views that, because this leads really to where we are now, because there's this whole kind of a swing back in today where we have people who, regardless of their age, are refusing to grow up, are like in this perpetual state of arrested development. And in Touch Me, your character, which is a really wild character, and we're going to try and unpack this a little bit, but is a narcissistic, hip-hop, obsessed alien, if that is correctly put, but
I think so.
But also in a way, is quintessentially a person who just refuses to grow up, or to take any responsibility.
Totally.
Did you approach, or how did you approach that? Was that from a case of, I'm going to approach this as a person who is not human, or was this a person who is deeply human but so broken down that he might as well be an alien? What was the process like?
For me, what was really fun about playing this character was that I got to have multiple personalities. Mm-hmm. He wasn't one person with limits as to who he was. He wasn't built by a history. Mm-hmm. He's built by being what everyone needs him to be at that moment. Mm-hmm. So he has created an understanding of how to manipulate people using his personality. He's truly a cult leader type style person. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like you said, wildly in love with himself. Yeah. And hiding it in the most soft, vulnerable way. Mm-hmm. Being what people need him to be, to see him as a sincere person. So truly like a scary, scary narcissist, because it's not someone who's overtly confident to the point that you know that they're a narcissist. They're almost hiding it. I think it's called a covert narcissist. Yeah. It's a different style thing, and I think that that's what I was playing, and it's quite scary. I wouldn't want to meet one in real life.
No, it has that whole Davidian kind of thing of they will pour honey into your ear until you choke onto it, and it's just it really frightens me, because I have a hard time reading people as it is. But with this character, I think what makes the performance so great is that I knew there was something off, even when all the signs were pointing to there's nothing wrong here. Yeah. This is just a person that you really want to hang out with. Yeah. But like you feel like a tingle in the back of your spine of going like that. No, wait.
Yeah.
I should not go into any room with this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's a little bit of a scary guy. I'm glad that you felt that way. That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, but also like when this movie came to you, what was the reaction to that? Because this is like it's a homage to Japanese films. There's stuff about tentacles. There's a lot of parasocial relationships. It's really, it packs on so much into it that in the hands of like a lesser filmmaker, I don't know if it would work at all. But like this is a really assured filmmaking process from the director, and like the way that it again balances that tone and walks that tightrope. But when it first came to you, what was your reaction to that? Was that again like was it scared, or was it like I need to do this?
It was one of those feelings of, God, they keep giving me the shit that nobody else can do because this is so weird. No one would know how to do this. And then, but really what it came from is the Rustic Films production house, which is David Lawson, Aaron Moorhead, and Justin Benson. I had worked with Aaron and Justin on Spring, and then I had just worked with them on Daredevil, where they were directing a few episodes of that, and in some ways show running that whole experience. So I had just worked with them multiple times, and now they had signed on to this because they met Addison at film festivals. Addison is the director of Touch Me.
Yeah.
And so Addison Hyman.
Yeah.
And so they met him at film festivals, loved him as a person, and then also, asked if he had something interesting, because he had made a movie called Hypochondriac, which was already good and like making people see his stuff. And now they asked him, do you have any other scripts? So he sent them Touch Me. And it's really based on Addison's own very depressive times that he's been in. He wrote it apparently when he was very depressed. Right. So he was trying to find a metaphor for, if, hey, what would make you happy? If you could touch someone's skin, if you could touch someone and it would just take all of your anxiety away and just make you feel whole again. So that's why he made this story. The way that I was sold to this part was that David Lawson, the third person of the Rustic, triumvirate, was he was really in need of this character. They could not cast this role. And so he had worked with me before, and he knew that I did Spring, which also had some tentacle sex in it a little bit. And he was like, hey, I know you like tentacle sex. I would really love if you wanted to read this story. And so he pitched me this idea of, this person who everyone was in love with, but underneath his skin, he was truly an alien from another planet who would enslave people into toxic relationships and keep them sort of enslaved into like sexual relationships with his tentacle sex. So yeah, he asked me if I would do it, and then I read the script once, twice, 3 times, and I still was like, I have no idea what the fuck I just read. I have no clue. So I was like, he kept calling, and he was like, we really have to cast this. We really need to know fast because we're going to shoot it in a month. I said, okay, can I just sit down with Addison? I just need to ask him some questions. And so I sat down with Addison, and he said he was very surprised at my questions because all of them were sci-fi questions. I was like, what's in the serum when they wake him up? You know what I mean? Why isn't the main actress Joey, like, why isn't she pregnant with the kind of alien worm baby? Like what's the difference? And so he was answering all of these sci-fi questions, and it made him kind of think about things, right. Which was great. And the biggest thing that it showed me was, oh, this guy really knows what he wrote. Because I think for an actor, when we see something like that, I think the scariest thing is if it's a comedy just to be funny. Right. You know what I mean? If it's like, who cares? It's flippant. Like, oh, I just wrote it because it's hilarious. You know what I mean? I wrote it because it's a good joke. That's not why this was written at all. It all had truly deep ideas about toxic relationships between best friends and between lovers. Right. So I really got I really think that me and Addison saw eye to eye on that, and I realized like, oh, this guy is not just making something to be funny. He's making something that it has some depth and that he knows about very well. So I think that I can trust him to make a really careful film out of this.
Yeah, I think the best compliment I can give about the film and your performance in it is that it is outlandish and it's wild and there's the movie goes to some really weird and horrifying places. Oh yeah. And I want to emphasize I believed you. Like I believed your character, and I think that it comes through with what you just said about the fact that it comes from a genuine place of the real emotions of abuse and of depression and all these things. So at no point did it feel like that this is a caricature, but that this is a person.
And that was maybe the hardest thing, because the truth is, when you read that script, the first things that I thought of were like Gene Wilder in Willy Wonka,
Right.
or Tim Curry in Rocky Horror Picture Show, you know, the Dr. Frankenfurter or the Willy Wonka, which are more caricatures.
Yeah.
You know, it's more cartoonish, and so I kept wanting to go that far. You know, in my mind, it felt that big.
Right.
And Addison was like, no, we have to rein this in. We have to bring it back to something real. And I think that I also, I couldn't help but do that, to tell you the truth, because for me, I have to believe myself, or else it's not going to be a good character.
Right.
And so I believed him very much. I believed Brian was like a person who really is trying to be like a good person. He just doesn't know what the hell that is. He's doing it based on other people's opinion and what he can get out of people. A truly power-hungry, scary, narcissistic person, because he's basing everything on what people need.
Yeah.
And he's being that thing for them. But for me, I just got to, I had to figure out a way to believe myself, you know? Yeah. And I think that comes from, you know, spoiler alert, but he is an alien, and he's only been here for 5 years. Yeah. You know, so he gets here, he's 5 years old. He's like, what's cool? What does everybody love? He sees TikTok, he sees people dancing. He's like, yeah, that's what people think is cool. And he becomes like hip hop dancer guy who is like exercising constantly to keep like a firm physique. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's pretty much all he cared about, was being what everybody loves.
Yeah, I had a note in my journal when I was watching it that it's the kind of person you see online who has a lifestyle but not a life.
Yes.
And I think that was exactly the thing where I started getting it, like, oh, this is where we're going with this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm glad that you affirmed that.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, but but in some ways he's a very real person. I think there's a lot of them out there.
Absolutely. I think it would be scary to find out exactly how many.
Yeah. Yes.
But I do want to ask, we've already kind of skirted around the issue quite a bit, but like, because with your career and with especially this character, it goes between making people laugh and making people feel unnerved and making people squirm. And I always wonder about this. Is it more fun to make people laugh outright, or make them squirm and be uncomfortable with that, should they laugh or not?
I think that for me as an actor, I can't think of that stuff as we're filming, you know? For me, at watching it now, I think that it's more fun to make people laugh.
Okay.
But when I'm making it, it's really about getting under people's skin. So it is a little bit more about, you know, making people squirm. Because if you're making people think about themselves, then they're having to face truths within themselves that they don't usually want to see.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to be really honest with yourself as an actor, and be that person showing the truths of like what we're usually hiding. Yeah. And so that's going to make other people watching it squirm. It's going to make them kind of a little freaked out. But the thing that I like to watch in a movie theater is if people are laughing. Yeah.
It's a pretty good gauge to know if something works then, because it's such a genuine reaction. It's either laughs or screams. Yes. Like, you can't get more genuine than that.
That's true. And I've seen 2 versions of audiences for this movie. Mm-hmm. The first version of the audience that I saw, are people who understand the, well, the first version I saw was at Sundance, and for our premiere, it was people who took a while to get into the main relationship, you know, and between Joey and her best friend, and then when Brian comes into the mix, all of a sudden they were allowed to laugh.
Right.
It was like this crazy character came in, and now you can laugh. The other version that I've seen are people who actually understand that relationship from early on, and they laugh at the first section of the movie. But what's funny is they laugh at my character less when they relate to the main character more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch the audience. There's two different audiences that I've seen. It's pretty cool.
I want to one more thing before I let you go. I want to ask. I don't know how much you are allowed to talk about your part in Daredevil.
Oh yeah.
Because that is like a complete opposite. That is a very confident person who has made a very clear choice about what they're doing.
Oh yeah.
How was that like part? Because you got to work with, again, Vincent D'Onofrio, and you got to be back with Benson and Moorhead. Did that feel more comfortable jumping into a role like that, or was that another one of those parts where it's like nobody else will do this, but let's give it to Lou?
This is a funny one because so it's happened like 2 or 3 times now, but everyone loves torturing me. They love putting me in a cell and torturing me. I don't know if it's my face. They just really enjoy watching me get tortured.
Right.
So, you know, I saw this one as I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get tortured again. I can't believe it. But Aaron and Justin called me and they said, look, we might have found something for you. You know, we always are looking for things for you. We loved working with you long ago in spring, and we would love to work with you again, but it's sometimes hard to find that thing. And we think we found this character named Adam. The only thing is that the producers of this want to make sure that you can be intimidating, because you seem like very boyish in general, you know what I mean? You feel like very young. And so they want to make sure that you can be a rival to Kingpin in some way. Right. And so we want you to do an audition. And the audition is going to be based on fake material. So they gave me a 4-page scene of a monologue of a person being stuck in a cell and having to talk his way out of the cell, right. Which is kind of what I had to do in the show You. Mm-hmm. Another one where I was tortured and put in a cell. Yeah. So I did that audition. I sent it to them. They said, this is exactly what we needed. The producers came back and they called me a couple weeks later. They said, well, welcome to the Marvel Universe. I was like, that's the coolest thing you could have ever said.
It's a good phone call to get.
Totally. The first idea that they had for this character, though, was that he was going to be a second-in-command, like, mafia kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And obviously they went in a completely different direction, and only a week beforehand. You know, first of all, they had made 6 episodes of this show, and now shelved it, you know what I mean? And we're going to kind of restart the entire thing. Yeah. But Aaron and Justin and everyone on that show had to also use a lot of the work that was already filmed, mm-hmm. and so integrate it into a story that they were creating as if it was their own story from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So it really must have been one of the hardest things to possibly make. And I forget the actress's name because I only worked with her for the one day, but the woman who plays Kingpin's wife. Yes. She actually apparently was the one who said, I don't think that that this character would fall in love with someone who is also in that world, in that dark world of scams and cheating and mafia type hitmen. You know, I think that she would fall for someone who was sincere and honest, and so she was like, I think maybe he would be a painter. Yeah. And so that's what they ended up going with. Was that a week beforehand they called me up and they were like, okay, he's not a second-in-command mafia guy. He's actually a painter now. His name is Adam. All right, go. Yeah.
It's an interesting performance in the sense that it's confined, and there's a whole lot of talk about who you are to somebody else. And with that, like when you do get the moment where you have the moment of agency, it's even that is clear that you actually don't have it. You're just given an illusion of agency.
Right.
And it fascinates me that how do you play that in a way that like gives an audience hope that because we have to share in that false hope even though we know that that's going to be taken away from you. And that really fascinates me. Like, does that come already in the character, or is that something that just comes when you start putting it finally together?
For me, it's about finding that in the writing, because it's there. It's already there, and if it's not, then you have to create it. And so sometimes, yes, I have to create it, and I did have to make something out of nothing in some ways for that part, because there is not a lot of written words, there's not a lot of dialogue, there's not a lot of things that he even says. So it was a little bit more about just portraying the innocent, being the victim, and being a person who has every single part that I'm trying to put on film is dynamic, I guess you call it, where it's got peaks and valleys in one way or the other. Very confident, but also very weak. Very scared, but very sincere. And so I think that finding those dynamics, building a character that has strong sides one way and strong sides in the opposite way, create this character to all of a sudden feel like a real person. Because we're all wearing masks all the time. We're never saying what we really feel. We're never saying what we really mean. And so I think that actors who end up doing that, like playing the character as it is written, end up doing a disservice to the character, and it makes it like less dynamic. So I think that finding those opposites, those really strong opposites, and playing both of them, and I think that that's why it was a testament to the writers of that show were basically saying, we want him to be intimidating as well, because he could easily just be the victim. He could easily just be the innocent. But if we make him intimidating and make him a little bit like strong and scary, then all of a sudden we have a dynamic character. And we don't know what's going to happen with this guy, and we can root for him, but he might lose, and we can love him, but he's a real person.
Yeah, there's a great David Mills quote about the guy who made Deadwood, but he mentioned that every great character spins against the way they drive, so that somebody like Al Swearingen in Deadwood can be a whoremongering pimp who is just brutally violent, but also deeply invested in making sure that the people he pimps out are taken care of, and it's just a complete contradiction. And I think that in a way, a lot of your characters, why I find them fascinating, are because they are like that, like you just mentioned, that they are victims who are also capable of great violence. They are, flighty while also completely manipulative. And I think that is what makes such a fascinating career like yours, and it makes it fascinating to watch.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. It was, here's an interesting insight. For Thumbsucker, what was really a funny thing to happen was that we made that whole movie. Obviously, Mike Mills wanted us to be a real family. He really wanted us to create that family dynamic, and he wanted to basically be able to make almost a documentary about this family. So he had us rehearse for weeks as a family, But what was crazy is I was in the beginning of my career, and I didn't understand that you need those two opposites. You need those two opposite sides of a person. And if you just act like if you play the character too real, too realistically, like a documentary, it can be very boring. It can be one note. It can be one-sided or one-dimensional. And so even though I was doing what you could consider like the best acting, you know what I mean, in some ways, because you really were becoming that person, you really were that character, it's funny how it doesn't show up on film well at all. And so they ended up having to reshoot some of the most pivotal scenes in that movie. Almost all of the most pivotal scenes in that movie. It was about a 3 or 4 day reshoot. And they brought us all back to Oregon, Vincent D'Onofrio, Tilda, and me, and Keanu, and we had to reshoot a lot of these scenes. Now, what was weird was I had now had 6 months off, and I was like living my life like a normal kid again, and I was like happy and fun. And so I came into these scenes not like I had been when I was first doing Thumbsucker, which was a boy who was very depressed and very sad and really trying to figure out what he wants to do. But now, just as a guy who is kind of normal, like a kid who could laugh and could smile, and bringing that smiling nature into the new scenes made the scenes dynamic. All of a sudden, now in the strongest scenes in the movie, you could see the opposite. You could see these two different sides. And I realized that finally, and I was like, oh. When I watched the editors editing that movie, I was like, holy shit. Being realistic is not the best acting you can do. It's actually, in some ways, it can be the worst acting you could do. Like, just because it feels real to the actor does not mean that it's going to be entertaining to watch. And so that's what I've spent the rest of my career trying to figure out, is how to make a character feel more dynamic, feel like there's more opposites, and that there's two sides and two natures to them, rather than just playing what the text is. Yeah. Yeah, but Thumbsucker only exists in such a way because they did reshoots. Isn't that crazy?
Sometimes they help.
Yeah, incredibly. Yeah.
Well, again, I've taken up too much of your time. Thank you very much. This was really great.
Hell yeah! Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really nice. Thanks, man.